Hi, I'm Samantha Murray,
Hi, I'm Courtney Sembler.
and this is CX Signals. If you've spent any time in customer education, you already know his name. Adam Avramescu literally wrote the book on customer education and then spent the better part of 15 years actually living it. He's built programs at Optimizely, Slack, and most recently Personio, where he scaled what started as a customer ed org into a full-scaled CX function. He's also the co-host of CELab, which has become a go-to resource for customer ed practitioners everywhere. In this conversation, we go deep on what it actually takes to lead CX at a senior level, connecting your programs to real business outcomes, not just content output. We talk through how and when to move from siloed functions to a unified digital experience, the org design decisions that either expand your seat at the table or quietly shrink it, and what a pragmatic AI strategy looks like when you strip away the hype. If you're ready to lead the next era of CX, this conversation was made for you. Let's get into it.
We are here to talk about the evolution of customer education. Obviously, the three of us and many others in the industry have had many a conversation about this. We've talked a whole lot about the evolution of CE into digital CX, scaled CX. We all have different names for it. We're probably going to talk about that a little bit, but I would love, Adam, for you to maybe just kick us off with like some of your own journey through this, because you started in customer education. Obviously, your role now at Personio has evolved to encompass many more functions. And so maybe just share your journey through these functions over the years as a starting point.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't prepared for this. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. So really my journey is I started out in instructional design. That's not something that I really knew what it was, but my first job was as an instructional designer and content developer. And I've always been interested in writing and language and how people learn and absorb information. And so learning that there was a whole field about that was super interesting. And that eventually brought me into the world of working with clients as an instructional designer. And what I found as I was doing that is that I really liked the part where I was doing that work, but I was also doing it externally with clients and felt like ultimately it felt a little bit more direct and tangible and impactful, so to speak. So that's ultimately what brought me into the world of customer education. And I started out in customer education the way I think a lot of people do, especially when they come to an early stage tech company where you're making content and figuring out along the way. Eventually at Optimizely was the first, let's say, like real customer education role as we understand it today. Eventually was promoted to lead and build out that. And we built a pretty holistic program ultimately that was under the name Optiverse. And in the Optiverse, we had our help center, our academy, our community. We eventually did certifications, we did in-apps. So that was where I think I first saw the possibilities of all the different surfaces, the types of content, the distribution channels that we had for customer education. And so since then, been through a few more build outs. Checker, Slack, which was especially focused on enterprise education and certifications, skill badges, all of that good stuff. And most recently at Personio, which again has been about building a very holistic program with most of the services that I just talked about. Here at Personio, we've done it under the name Voyager by Personio. And again, like very similar setup to what we were trying to build with the Optiverse the first time. But over time, that team has also expanded from what was originally maybe customer education plus some other things into now what we would call scaled CX. So really not just producing the content that helps our customers activate, adopt, and ultimately retain with our product with a minimum of friction, so thereby also preventing support tickets, but also really the distribution channels that we're using to meet our customers where they are.
Hearing you talk made me think that there's this, I don't know if it's like a natural evolution that leaders will go through, or probably there are some leaders in our field who have gone through this, but there's kind of like you're overseeing customer ed. You might do customer ed plus, to your point. So like, oh, I absorbed the community team. Or maybe I want to take on like the function of a marketer to support the promotion of these materials. It looks like lifecycle marketing or something along those lines, customer marketing. But then there's this like total holistic thing, which is actually, in my opinion, very different than Customer Ed Plus. It's like a whole different thing because you're thinking holistically about how to leverage different distribution channels to achieve an outcome for the customer and for the business. And to me, that's the differentiator. It's no longer about like, I'm producing content and I know that I need to connect it into my community or my knowledge base or whatever, but it's more like, how do I use all of the different surfaces that are available to me to impact the customer? Like, do you agree? Is that a correct assessment? Both of you, Courtney, would love your take as well.
I love the way that sort of evolution has happened. We saw it a lot at HubSpot when I was there. Of there was sort of the like we bolted on other programs to Academy of like, oh, we can take on this, we can take on that. But when we made this shift to actually think about it as one fluid thing, and the big thing for us was when we started to do scaled onboarding. It was like, all right, Academy is going to be, yes, an acquisition function. We did bring in content leads, quite a lot of them. And then we're going to be a retention function. And now we're actually going to go to the middle of this journey and help with the activation and do it very like proactively, thoughtfully. It wasn't going to be an add-on. We used that ever boarding methodology in that where it was like, all right, this is now going to be a fluid, continuous motion for our customers of pre-sale, you're with Academy, you're learning, and oh, hey, by the way, if you are certified before you're a customer, you can waive that cost of onboarding, which creates an incentive for both internal and external sort of folks to come to that academy. And to me, that felt like where things actually started to get what we hope to see in that like digital scaled motion of where academy or customer education, whatever you want to call it, becomes a foundational piece, not like the thing you sprinkle in. We didn't fully make that motion with community. I would say like before I left, that was still something that we were trying to like not make it so like bolted on, but like really fluid together. But that digital experience, like converging really quickly around, all right, you have the content, you have activation work, you have usage things that you're doing. How are we going to bring it together? How are we going to automate it? Yes, there's probably agents that are going to help like make that conversation fluid for your customers as well.
Yeah, I would agree, and I really appreciated hearing the way that you just spoke about that because I mean it also it mirrors my experience in a lot of way too, where I think like what separates in some ways the traditional way of looking at customer education, which is like we're a content team, and then the way that we do delivery is by training people, right? That's like the historical way of looking at customer education, and now actually like distribution is it like should be layered in the first place. And when you have that, when you actually are thinking first and foremost about how is the customer going to consume this content and what is this content supposed to help the customer do, then you're thinking about customer education in a very different way. And you're actually, I think at that point, thinking about something more like digital CS, digital CX, right? Because that's what that whole discipline is about. And that's why I think they're coming together a lot more in organizations. But the thing that really resonated with me about what you just said is like it's not even just about content or distribution. It's about starting with a business goal or a customer outcome. And then when all of the programs that we just talked about are playing a role in driving that customer outcome, that already starts to create a lot more alignment. And then the more programs that get aligned around like what should this program be doing at this part of the journey,
Yeah.
I think to me that represents a pretty fundamental shift from like we're a content team or we're a distribution team.
Yeah, and it changes the conversation internally so much. Like I felt that in the last couple of years of, while HubSpot very bought into Academy, it was still sometimes an afterthought or like, oh, Academy will just take care of it. We don't need to think about it. Versus when we're coming to the table of like, no, 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 this is the activation goal. This is the usage. This is what we're actually doing with the sales team, with the CS team. That completely changed the conversations I had internally and like put me at new tables that I previously didn't even know existed, honestly. Like, particularly that revenue table where I was like, all right, Academy traditionally free education, very different revenue conversation. Now I'm like, all right, here's how we can actually drive usage and ARR through kind of a unified experience, those were fun conversations. I don't know, Adam, like what that looked like as you transitioned to
Yeah.
Personio, if that changed for you.
To Personio, I don't know. I mean, so yeah, I guess that's one thing worth calling out. Like I'm at the VP level now. It's very different than it was when I was coming up in the field. And I think that on one level brings me into certain rooms and certain tables that I wouldn't be at otherwise. But like the other thing, you're right, is the nature of the work. And I think one thing that's becoming a lot more common, I think especially when you're driving these sorts of programs and functions at a more senior level is setting targets, taking numbers, finding like the business contribution that is relevant to the business, tied to core company initiatives. So you're thinking less bottoms up around what content am I making, and then like where can we put the content, and more what is the business goal that we're trying to drive, and then how do I orchestrate these programs to achieve them, right? Like I think especially at the we could call it even the director plus level, you're thinking a lot more about how you're like not about your individual function, but you're using your function to drive a broader business goal. And I think like it doesn't need to mean that your function is directly driving revenue, because that can be a distraction just as much as anything. Like it used to be that the prevailing wisdom when you would go to some of these conferences would be, hey, you need to directly generate revenue and you need to do training services and they need to be this much of a revenue impact. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to self-fund and you're going to go to the table and be empty-handed. But I think similar to you, what I found is you can actually do the same thing, but probably in an even more powerful way in more modern businesses, not by being this like weird little P&L on your own that's not connected to everything, that maybe you're self-funding, but like nobody cares about or understands what you do, but rather make what you do relevant to the business so they understand what you do.
It's such a like catch-22. It's like, well, you need a P&L to be relevant. I'm like, right, but like mine's going to be so small, you're not going to care about it anyways. So
Exactly.
why does it matter?
I don't think that's the right way to approach it.
And I think that's part of the fundamental flaw too with most teams that want to scale their programs. I think the natural inclination over the years has been, well, I'm going to start charging for certifications or certain programs, and therefore I'm going to move from being cost center to profit center in some way. I'm going to start generating my own revenue. But like to your point, Adam, like shifting the focus to what are the main challenges of the business and where is the business trying to grow and scale, and like attaching yourself to that and figuring out how your programs can move the needle on those things. I think that's the reason why, in a lot of ways, I was able to grow my career so quickly in this space, is because that's always been my mentality. It's like I don't just want to put content out and see if the content, is going to drive a behavior in the customer. I also want to make sure that anything we do is directly connected to business and everything is driven from that place first. And that also, in my opinion, has allowed me and others that I've observed that have done really well in the space to expand the scope. To me, that's kind of maybe part of the driver of this change that we're seeing, is like once you start doing that, you realize that maybe the traditional training programs that you used to run aren't the only answer. There are actually 10 different solutions or 10 different answers to the problem that you're trying to solve. And so suddenly your scope expands or your field of view expands. And it's like, I see what else I can be doing and how I can drive impact.
Exactly. And it might be that doing a training P&L is the right way to approach. There are still some businesses out there that, based on the nature of the product, based on the nature of the customer base, like let's imagine you're going and doing a ton of complex services for large enterprise customers. Well, yeah, maybe it makes sense for you to do that then. But like I would always say, think of it as a portfolio, right? You have a portfolio of programs and services and channels and activities that are all based in helping someone do something better. And you have multiple ways to achieve that. But the key, I think, in being a leader, at least at a certain level, is reading the room on what is the business looking to do, and then which of my tools in my portfolio should I use to achieve that, and what can I use in certain ways. Because otherwise, I think if you have the equation flipped and you're either like doing things just because you're hoping that it'll make you relevant, or just hoping that it'll make the CFO look at you, or sometimes not look at you, depending on
I was like,
what you want
look
to
at
achieve.
me, ignore me. What are we looking at?
Exactly. Do not perceive me. I don't want to be perceived. Right. Like I think there's a little bit, or like just increasing your scope for scope's sake. I think that's probably something we'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about different org setups and things like that. But I don't think those are de facto good. Like I think like to be successful in this industry, you really have to first think about like what is the business trying to do, and then almost like how do I put on my problem solving and consulting hat and use the different tools that I have to actually help the business solve a problem.
Yeah. Love it. Okay, so now you've alluded to this like idea of a portfolio. I'm sure that's probably how you're thinking about your team structure now. You have a bunch of different surfaces that are available. You have different programs that are running across those different channels. What's the total makeup of the team now, and how do you think about leveraging those different channels and surfaces to drive very specific outcomes? I kind of want to like dig one level in.
Yeah. So probably helpful if we're talking about it as a portfolio to talk about, things we've added and things we've dropped from the portfolio over time. Because even within any of these areas, we're always looking at like, where do we want to make big bets or where do we want to experiment with things? And I mean, the nice thing about experiments is you can usually turn them off. They're not one-way doors. But sometimes you make bigger bets or you really start staffing a team around something, and then that's harder to turn off or just pivot on a dime. So when I came into Personio, for instance, I came into already a relatively established set of teams, and there were actually 3 teams that were being brought together as part of what we were then calling the customer education org. So one, you had basically a content and channels team. So primarily that was writers who were working on our help center and our written content, as well as channel managers who were doing our in-app education and also looking after the distribution of the content into the help center. So basically, like everything aside from the creation of the content, how do we get it out to people? The second team that I inherited was a community team, and they were focused on running both the online community as well as doing customer events like user groups and customer advisory board and things like that. And then the third team was actually an internal facing enablement team. And they were looking after how to enable the rest of our CX team, whether that was CSMs or support teams or professional services or account managers, on ultimately not just how to build their product knowledge, but also how to do their jobs better. And so the fourth team that then basically I was tasked with hiring and building up from scratch was our training and credentialing team. So really building out the academy with learning experience designers. And we also hired a very talented program manager to look after all the systems and processes and ops and all the stuff that, that under the hood you need to actually make these things run. So I'm going to get back to your question about how these teams align to make things work, but maybe I'll also call out that over time that model evolved. Like we have reorged some of the teams and restructured the way that some of them work, but some of them, we even deliberately said, let's not continue to keep them in the portfolio of our team, because especially when we started pivoting towards being scaled CX, we realized it didn't make a whole lot of sense to just keep a internal enablement team within our world. It actually made way more sense to say, let's take all of the scope that relates to how we drive customer outcomes at scale, and let's not keep all the parts that are about education that don't really have that much to do with customers. So there we actually realigned so that our internal CX enablement team was then paired with our revenue enablement team and eventually with our CX operations. And it just ended up making, I think, more sense in the end. And also I think gave us a tighter scope. So to that end, like, how do we do this? Well, we look at the different customer outcomes that we drive, which primarily for us are activation, because Personio is an HR and payroll software product. So making sure that you're actually set up correctly and that the customer is confident with how all of their sensitive employee data and payroll data is being processed is actually really, really, really important compared to
You
some
don't say.
platforms. Yeah, where like,
What?
because there are some platforms, like I always think about some of these things as like how high are the stakes of using the platform? Because there are some where it's pretty experimental. You can just turn it on. You can make mistakes. Like you're not really going to ruin very much, especially if you just like switch the off button, right? Like when I worked at Optimizely was a lot like that, right? Like you could literally like install the snippet on your website that day, and if you didn't like it, you turned off the
Turned it off.
snippet. Yeah, exactly. No harm, no foul. HR software is not like that. So activation is really important. The next one is looking at adoption that is predictive of retention. And for us, those two are tied together, ensuring that our customers, when they purchase additional apps like our recruiting module or our performance and development module, that they're able to use those appropriately as well. And there, you start to get into a little bit of process design too, right? Because how you use your HR platform as a system of record you have to think about a lot of technical details and compliance and all of that, but you don't necessarily need to like design as much process on top of that in the same way that you would to say, how do I run a recruiting workflow? How do I run a performance development cycle? That has a lot more to do with the way that your org works. And therefore, we have to educate you not just on what buttons to click in the product, but like what makes a good performance cycle if we're talking to a small business in Germany who has never done this before, for instance. And then finally, the last thing that we really look after and focus on is contact rate reduction. So looking at how we drive effective self-service, if you want to look at that in the positive. And there, we're really looking at what are the top volume drivers. We look at our support data. And there, again, we use a variety of channels and programs like really effective help center content, but also where it's distributed primarily through like in-app contextual help. And increasingly now, the one that I'm really excited about is implementing AI self-service. We're using Intercom Fin for this now to use the content contextually to actually help the customer self-serve before they even need to submit a ticket. You can imagine that each of those goals is going to require a different alignment of those programs. And I think that's actually been the journey over time, is to like not say to each of those individual teams, hey, do whatever you can to drive these three big outcomes, but rather, how do we cluster the teams together to work in unison, especially with some other stakeholder teams on driving those outcomes.
Yeah. It's such an interesting to pull on that thread of like so easy for us usually as education teams, like, oh, we have to pull all the education together. Like we're probably using similar processes or tools. And to your point on enablement, it's like if that alignment doesn't happen at the like top level, like what's the business outcome, customers are internal. If that's not there, we're gonna actually like, probably waste a lot of time trying to make that work. I'd be curious in your time, a decision to like either reorg or like restructure that went really well and something that where you're like, and now with hindsight, I wouldn't have done it that way.
One thing I think that went well, originally mentioned that we had a channels team and they were kind of layered within our content org. But something that I don't think was working super well there was that you almost then had channels in service of the content that was being produced. And one thing that we were looking at is we actually need that to be a lot more on eye level so that every team who creates content is also thinking about distribution to begin with. But we have a team who really owns like how that content is going to be distributed at those key moments. So for instance, like activation is a really good example. When we get our customers to activate, whether that's being primarily human led with an implementation manager or primarily self-service through an in-product wizard, having a team that actually looks across all of that and orchestrates that with email campaigns, with in-app messages, using the content that is created, like that works a lot better. And so that's how we took that channels team and almost like refactored it, because we didn't just lift and shift all the existing roles. Like some of those roles actually went into other teams and then some new roles came in. But we have now a very talented digital CX team who is responsible for like the second version of what I just said.
I just find it interesting of like, particularly when you're in this transition, as so many teams and companies are, of like, you're going from maybe a traditional customer ed, you're moving into the scale, like you're going to reorg, you're going to do something that doesn't go well, and how you reflect on that and then also change it again. Like so many companies I talk to, they're like, well, this is just the way we're structured. Something I saw a lot at HubSpot that maybe we didn't always do really well was make that pivot quickly. And then, all the classic signs are there, right? Where it's like, oh, there's high attrition from that team, or like ENPS is going down on that team, or, whatever it may be. But the fear of saying, oh, we made that decision for this period of time, or when the team was structured this way, it made sense. And now it doesn't. I find that personally like something that all leaders should be getting better at now in the age of AI as well.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think like I'm sure if I thought about it and like really challenged my own confirmation bias, like I would probably think of some conscious decisions I made that were wrong, because I'm sure I did. It's just that none are coming openly to mind right now. The things that I think about more are kind of to your point, structures that I held on for too long and maybe didn't change, or things that I took on or that we took on because either like we wanted to grow our scope, but weren't necessarily thinking about like what cost that scope came at, or whether it really made sense to hang on to some of those things. Because sometimes I think we we held on to certain programs because we've always done them, or we felt like if we didn't do them, nobody else would and things would fall apart. So I'll tell you, but eventually we made the decision to actually move our customer advisory board to marketing and pair it more with our customer marketing and advocacy programs, because in a way, it's like we were keeping that aligned to our community and events programs, but we kept seeing this tension between ourselves and marketing where we're like, okay, we're both doing events, we're both doing these customer boards. Our product and technology team is also doing customer boards. So when you start to see some of those siloing throughout the business, like I don't like to default to the idea that, okay, because I'm most familiar with what we're doing it, that we're doing it best. What I've learned over time is it's almost better, especially if you have, like other leaders that you can collaborate with on those other teams, to really open it up, go back a little bit to first principles and say, if we weren't organized this way, would we make the same decision? Would we build the team the same way? And if the answer is no, then like we might not be able to fix it immediately. But I think sometimes I was too slow to have those conversations.
Yeah, and that's particularly for people who are like empire builders. Like I want to build my empire. I want to come in and have the most amount of impact. We like lose the forest through the trees a little bit where you're like, oh, if I want to go have this bigger business impact, I actually have to like clear some space. Gotta like
Yeah.
chop down some trees here to make a clearing for new stuff to come in.
That's a really good point. And something that I would like also really double down on is like, I think a lot of people assume just de facto that like more scope is better. And like, I think that's where a lot of the empire building tendencies come from. But the problem is the more scope you take on, especially if it's not pointed at something where you can clearly articulate the value, you actually lose focus and you dilute your ability to deliver on results. Because at some point, like all of these programs, education, community, digital, they run the risk of becoming the everything team. And when you're a growing business and when all of those decisions are in front of you and you can take on new things and build new things and pilot new things and experiment new things, it's okay to incubate them and then decide if it makes sense for you to continue to have them or whether they should go somewhere else eventually that better aligns to a clear business goal. But if you can't articulate what your clear business goal is and what metrics you are primarily here to move, like 80% of your time, let's say, then your everything team becomes the nothing team. So I'm actually very allergic to taking on scope arbitrarily to the point where it dilutes your focus and the ability to tell the core story around what you're here to do.
There's a quote that I love and I never remember who it's by. And so I'm very sorry if someone's listening and this is your quote, but it's the startups don't starve, they drown. If everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And I wish that everyone had that printed out in their offices sometimes of like, you could actually do with less and less sometimes is going to be able to give you more.
It's
Sorry, Sam.
very
I just
similar
didn't wanna cut
to
you off.
that David Packard quote. It's like companies don't die of starvation, they die of indigestion.
Yep.
I think there's something too to be said around like leadership journey in this, because when I was earlier in my career, I definitely felt myself grasping a little bit for that like scope. Like, I know I can do more. I want to grow my team. I want to take on some of these additional functions. And you end up in this mode where, like, to both of your points, your team ends up bloated. And then it's like, am I actually driving the impact that I want to have? Because at the end of the day, my ability to then continue scaling and growing my career and achieving higher leadership roles is based on impact, not on size of team and number of people that report into you. And I really had to make that shift at Docebo because, Adam, you were kind of sharing about like, you end up the de facto team. I ended up the de facto team, right? You start scaling a scope and it's like, oh, well, you should just take on this other thing. And we have this other program that we've been running. You should just take on this other thing. And my team very much ended up bloated. And in a lot of ways, it was awesome because, first of all, I learned a lot beyond my original scope of expertise, which was an amazing opportunity for me. But I also learned what I could, you used the word incubate. I love that. It's like, I'm going to start this thing and I'm going to pull these functions together because I see the correlation and I know that 1 + 1 = 3. Like if we just kind of pull these things together, it's going to drive a bigger impact, but it doesn't belong to me forever. And we're going to find the right home for it and realign it once the engine is running, I guess.
Yes, 100%. I think like, again, it's you have to challenge your own scope and what you're here to do that. But like, it's hard to do if it's your first time building a program. By the way, I also think this has changed a lot in the past few years because when we were in the growth at all costs, zero interest rate era of SaaS, then growing your team was a sign of prestige, right? Like, and companies could afford it. They weren't really scrutinizing headcount in the same way that they are now. They were
100%.
thinking about, at best they were thinking about, CAC to LTV ratio. But now it's like ARR to FTE is like the prestige number. And the smaller a team you have and the more efficiently you can run, the better you look to investors. And so it's not just that like your CEO woke up one day and said, like, how can we cut your team? It's that this is the pressure that they're getting from investors as well, right? To run more efficiently. And
Yeah.
I think maybe to like cap this thought off and tie it back to something that we said earlier is why I a little bit resist the idea that there is like this one correct way of expanding your scope and consolidating your org. Because there are definitely schools of thought out there that say, take all of the customer facing scale stuff and put it together and call it scaled CX. Well, fine, if that's right for your business, but it might not be. There are also schools of thought that say, take all of your learning stuff, take all of your customer and your partner and your internal enablement and put them all together in this like CLO style org. And again, that might be right, but it might not be. But I think like, especially if you haven't done this before, or it's your, first or second time, and you're sort of looking around and saying like, well, should I be consolidating this? And should I be consolidating it in this way? There is no one right way. And I think like one of the worst things that you could do is like kind of like take on scope arbitrarily without like a clear story for what you're going to do.
Or trust the vendors who are trying to push a certain story.
Well, yeah,
You
that's
know?
true. Like a lot of this is like if I sell an LMS and the LMS is for like customers and partners and internal, then
Right?
yes, I'm going to market that like there should be one business decision maker around all three of those things. Yes, we can
Yep.
say the quiet part out.
Yeah. So culprit over here of pushing that message and that narrative in the market. But I want to maybe let's go there a little bit, because one of the things that I thought was really powerful when we started to see some of these organizations pull together their various learning teams under the umbrella of like a VP or a CLO of learning is the content efficiency. Like the content engine becomes much more efficient, because often what you see in organizations is when there are silos and when the teams don't even have like a center of excellence or any kind of like touch point where they meet regularly to even talk about their content roadmaps, right? At the very least have that. But if you don't have that, you're operating in silo, there's often a ton of duplication. And so part of the benefit of pulling these teams together in that scenario is like, if you have a super complex content library, if you find that your internal teams are in need of a lot of the same education, because it's kind of like market education or role-based stuff, and you find that your internal teams are in need of that, then it might make sense to pull those teams together, because there's a lot of efficiency gains to be made in that format. But the problem then that I've observed is when a partner and like customer team ends up getting laddered into a CLO, they lose the focus on the customer outcomes often. And so then you're in the scenario where it's content for the sake of content, you're outputting a bunch of programs, but you don't really know the impact that you're driving against customer outcomes, right?
It's a little bit like pick your poison, right?
Right.
Like you have inherently, there's always going to be some teams that are clustered together to gain efficiencies and drive certain outcomes because they can do it closer together. And then there are teams that you're going to have to collaborate with. And in fact, many orgs, especially Courtney, maybe you've seen this, like at a certain point, you get kind of like the yearly reorg in larger companies where they're like, oh, we're going to consolidate all the learning teams. No, we're going to consolidate all the customer teams. No, now we're going to go back to like consolidating all the learning teams.
I like to tell my team, I was like, we are the best travelers. We have carry-on because every 18 months, someone's going to tell us that we belong in a different part of the organization. Some leader, either new or tenured, is going to be like, I must have this thing. And you know what? Let's take it as a compliment. We're very popular. Yeah. We're just going to travel around. We're going to, we're just going to see the sites internally. There was a period of 5 years where every 14 months, I had a new manager and a new manager because we were being shipped, not just within teams, but across departments. We sat in customer success. We sat in marketing. We sat in acquisition and marketing. We sat in brand. And actually, what I love about some of the conversation we're having too is from a consolidation standpoint, one of the things that we got to was we started thinking about programs more in the like startup scale up. And when they're in the startup phase, they have to be potentially consolidated. Our partner accreditations were a great example. The partner team long term was going to need to run partner accreditations, but they didn't have the technology, they didn't have the infrastructure, they didn't understand the like nuts and bolts of building an accreditation. So we brought that in-house to Academy in its startup phase. And one day, I'd like to say that like it graduated from middle school and it was ready to like launch itself into its like high school phase, in its like permanent home. And maybe one day it'll circle back, but that mentality took a little of the pressure off for us of, oh, like it started here, so it has to stay there. And it requires work as a leader of like, I hired people to work on accreditations that we're then going to have to either transition into new teams, new roles, or transition in our own team. And you have to talk about that ahead of time, or those people can feel like you're constantly ripping the rug out from underneath them.
Totally. Because like if you sign up for a startup or a scale up or a growth stage company, you almost have to assume that that stability is not going to be the case, right? Like change is the constant, and it is like high school. And to your point, like I feel very fortunate, first of all, that at Personio, I've been under the same leader the entire time, and he's been an amazing sponsor for the programs that I've been leading. But like that is rare, right? It's rare that
very
I've been
rare.
somewhere for 4 years under the same leader. Like very typically, it's the exact opposite of that, where you're right. Like every 14, 18, 24 months, whatever you want to say, some other leader looks at you from across the cafeteria and says, you belong with me.
You.
And in that moment, you want to be the cheerleader. You don't want to be sitting in the bleachers.
Love eyes, like
It
that
is.
emoji. It's like,
It's like the spotlight falls on you and you're like,
come with me.
I'm going to pick you out of obscurity and I'm going to make you famous. And you're like, no.
You're
No,
gonna
I
be
already
a
am.
star, kid. I'm gonna make you a star.
And then 14 months later, they're like, well, I think I want to go do something
Yeah, I'm
else.
not
And you're
sure.
like,
Yeah, but it takes that like that resilience and that openness to change and the acknowledgement up front, exactly to your point, that like that's probably going to happen. So, like what is it? Like prepare for the
you expect the unexpected.
expect the best, prayer for the worst, whatever it is.
You want to pray for the worst? That doesn't
No, I
sound right.
said I didn't say pray for the. I said prepare for the worst. I said expect the best, prepare for the worst. I think I don't use that phrase often, so I don't know how it goes.
I was like, Adam over here praying for the worst. He's like, I
do
want to
not pray
go
for the worst.
through it.
Do not put it in the newspaper that I said pray for the worst.
Is this another SOS call? Do you need to go get your hat?
Hashtag pray for the worst.
Put your hat on
I need
for a second?
I need help.
I don't know.
I need help. No, like it's like that. That's the spirit of incubation, right? Like that's why we sort of think about like building these programs, like knowing that they may not always be in the state they are.
I talked a little bit about a scenario in which it might make sense to consolidate learning teams under a CLO. What about the opposite? Like, when do you think in like a company's trajectory or a team's maturity, does it make sense to start thinking about pulling customer education alongside some of these other customer-facing programs?
Yeah, and when I don't have a great answer to when, but I would say like some of the cues that I would look for is that like generally a lot of these programs are going to get built up in silos, and you're going to have one team that says I want to build digital, and another team that says I want to build community, and another team that says I want to build academy or customer education, and maybe even another team that says I want to build help center. At a certain point, like those programs need to be built up at first, and it's fine when you're first building them up again in the startup stage that maybe they're being built a little bit separately. But I think at a certain point you start to notice the duplication of efforts. You notice the lack of coordination between the teams. You notice that teams are building very similar products or initiatives. And I think like the biggest signal is that the customer will start to give feedback at a certain point to say, I don't know where to go. I don't know how this program interacts with this program. They're not connected in the UI. I can't search them from the same place. You are not being opinionated about when I should go where for what. And to me, like when you first start to see that feedback, that's a sign to say, even if organizationally you're not going to pull all of those teams together, externally to the customer, you got to stop shipping the org chart and start like actually shipping a unified experience to them.
That language resonates deeply. I've been using that term like since the Shopify days, because I just found, I'm sure this is familiar to both of you, I found that every so often a new team would pop up with all of the best intentions, right? They're like, I see a problem that I'm going to try to fix, and I know the answer. I'm going to launch some sort of microsite with educational content, and I'm going to call it XYZ, and I'm going to publish this to the customers. And it's like, guys, did you not like use the internal wiki to check that there's already a team doing this? You could have come to us. And so like,
but Sam, their team has the solution to the problem. They've thought about it. They get it.
They do, right? But like recreating, like solving the same problem over and over among different teams and in different formats is like,
right.
That's a cue to say, hey, even if we're going to do it a little bit imperfectly to start with, why don't we all try solving this problem together?
Right. Because I just think about it from the customer's lens, right? Imagine, and this is true of a lot of tools that I try to use, like a lot of softwares that I'm adopting these days as a business owner. I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to get myself onboarded. I'm getting one message in my in-app. I'm getting emails. I'm getting inundated with emails that clearly the teams are not aligned internally because it's different messaging. They're pointing me to different things, different resources. They've got maybe an academy in one place, and it just feels really disjointed. The customers feel it when your teams are not aligned internally. They know when your teams are not aligned internally, especially for us. Like in tech, we're all users of tech. Like we're not only creating these programs, we're also users of tech. And so we can see through some of those challenges. And I just think it's always beneficial. Again, it's not about reorging. It's not about like, growing your empire. It's like, who can you meet with internally to make sure that there's at least some sort of alignment, that you're meeting regularly, that you understand what you're outputting, and that you're clear on like swim lanes a little bit so that it doesn't impact the customer experience.
Yes. But there's a couple of things in there that like I would like pull the thread on, and maybe we can have a little bit of discussion around this. Like you just talked about being customer centric, and I think it's something that we don't always do enough of as like customer education or like content people when we think of our role as content.
Mm-hmm.
Community people do it more because they're usually talking to customers directly. But if you're not talking to customers directly, or you don't have that in your portfolio, like you have to find a way to talk to customers, and you have to find a way to get customer feedback. So one thing that I'm always doing is like, I'm looking at the voice of customer stuff. I'm looking at the NPS surveys, and I'm forcing myself, or like getting people to force me to talk to customers on some basis, because otherwise like you can't really check your biases around some of these things. And like chances are the thing that customers are screaming to your frontline teams over and over, like even if your data that you're seeing internally doesn't completely align with what your customers are screaming, like if there's a disconnect between those two, what the customers are screaming is probably right to some extent, right? Because their experience is reality. So I think there's something to be said about that. And then the other point that you brought up, I think, is like keeping those really strong connections with cross-functional teams, so that, again, you know what those swim lanes are, but also so that you're aware of what each other are doing and how you can help each other. Because I think that's one way that you can prevent another team just deciding one day that they're going to completely duplicate the thing that you do. It's how you realize, like maybe when you're incubating something, where to move it onto a different team. And all of that in aggregate helps you look outside of your own world. And I think that's one really important thing that like we miss the mark on a lot, is like we like to talk about what content we're creating. We like to talk about the right way to create content and what to do that's like effective from a learning science standpoint. And I think a lot of the time, like, yes, I can read a lot of documentation and scientific studies that tell me what the right way to do some of those things are, but like, to me, sometimes that feels like we're doing it because we're looking for credibility, and because we're trying to be perceived, but like we're looking for credibility in all the wrong places. And I think it's better to be the type of leader who listens to what other teams are trying to accomplish, what the big company goals are, how we can work together to do that, what I can do and what my teams can do to contribute to that, and what the freaking customers are saying. Because that to me is like the better way to be heard, understood, perceived, credibility, seat at the table, all of that stuff, than like digging into this is what the learning science says, or this is the right way, capital the capital right, capital way to do things. And then nobody listens to us.
Yes.
And then we feel like victims. And like that's a cycle that I always, like, I never want to get into. And if I feel myself getting into it, I like try to snap myself out of that.
Court, I remember listening to you on a podcast a few months ago. I think it might have been The Adoption Curve, where you talked about needing to, there's this assumption that like, if you want to collaborate cross-functionally with other leaders in your company, like meet halfway. And I think you said something like, no, like you can't, you got to walk 90% of the way there. Like, that's the reality, right?
It is. And for a lot of learning teams, I think that victim mentality becomes really present, and it can be a vacuum, right? Where it's just this is echo chamber of like, no one listens to us and wants to talk to us. We have all this expertise. And for me personally, that shift came when I was at HubSpot. Mark Killens, the founder of Academy, when he left, he had obviously done a lot of the walking to the other teams to collaborate, right? Like that was a big part of his role. And we felt it when he was gone, like, oh, like sort of, the Spider-Man meme of like, okay, who's up next? Who's going to go and figure that out? And it was amazing. Like conversations we had at the leadership level, it was like, no, they should be coming to us. Like, don't they understand? And, kind of defying Courtney was like, screw this. I'm going to go put on my backpack and my walking shoes and I'm going to go walk over to all these other teams and I'm going to talk to them about what they need, what their customers need, what they're hearing. And there was friction sometimes because it wasn't always, quote unquote, what the industry, what LinkedIn was saying, what their person who was famous for something was telling them, or even what like books they read said to them. Like it, it was an uncomfortable place to be in because there's a little bit of that, like, hey, this is a unique situation for our customers. We got to solve that. And if you don't understand that, then you're the one who's actually not customer centric, not me. And that probably one of the most uncomfortable leadership places I've ever been in, but so impactful for the team, my relationships, and honestly, a little bit of the like owning the space around you of, hey, I'm happy to debate this. I'm happy to have this conversation. And if you think there's a different way to solve it, let's do it. But I can't sit here and just assume that like what so-and-so said even 10 years ago is what we have to do for our specific use case. And I'm also not going to sit back and wait for you to come and tell me my marching orders. Sure, it surprises neither one of you that I don't particularly like taking marching orders.
No.
And I
I think we
definitely
probably all have the defiant streak in us.
It runs real deep, real deep.
But I mean, we haven't even touched a little bit, and Adam, I'd love to hear a little bit from you on it of in an AI first world where everyone feels like they have the new solution to creating content faster, more efficiently, more effectively. And that conversation is starting to swirl internally with a lot of teams. That collaboration, the connections you have are actually going to be really important to have that deeper conversation of what do we actually need to do? Why do we need to do it? And what's going to be the tool that helps us achieve that? I already see it exploding of like, well, AI can just create the content and we'll just sit here. And I'm like, boy, I was like, we came so far. We're going to take 2 steps backwards. But Adam, I'd be curious to hear what those AI agentic system conversations have been like for you so far with your team. Is that adjusting the way you're thinking on the digital motion, on the content motion, even just in your leadership motions?
Yeah, I mean, probably similar to your experience, Courtney, in the sense that like AI is a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, it is supremely useful at doing certain things, and we can talk about those things in a moment. But to your point, I've also found that because it's really useful at doing certain things in a certain context, people tend to extrapolate that to like, oh, well, then why can't it do this? Why can't it do that? Surely it should be able to do this. And my position on that is, well, it may or may not be able to, but the only way we know is by trying. And trying generally means that we have to take the time to set it up and we have to test it and we have to see how it works compared to doing it the other way. Like let's not invest in AI on hope. Let's invest in AI as a tool and align with our strategy. And also, I do like the idea of having some experiments that run on the side to see what's interesting and what works and do some things that are leading edge, but like don't bank the strategy on it and don't commit to numbers or headcount or models or whatever that are based on some implied savings from AI that hasn't materialized and that nobody actually thought to validate. So I guess in that sense, like maybe we're thinking along similar lines, kind of like challenge the FOMO, challenge the wishful thinking, but at the same time, like lean into the stuff that is actually working really well. So for instance, like at Personio, we've gotten a lot of really good usage out of, first of all, our team members building their own assistants. We use a tool called LangDoc, which is sort of like ChatGPT Enterprise, but different. It aggregates a bunch of different models and I think has European data residency and all the good stuff that we need as a European company, but you can build your own assistants, which are sort of like custom GPTs. And our team members we actually had like an AI hackathon earlier in the year that was specifically around customer education use cases. And 2 of our team members led it. And the winning one was actually one where our non-German speakers could essentially have their posts translated and formatted correctly for our community so that our English-speaking PMs, for instance, could collaborate with our German-speaking customers in the
Cool.
community. And so there's like really cool stuff like that solves a very concrete problem. But let's also say that there's a big gap between doing that and putting that into production to solve a certain use case and then fully automating things end to end, which is where I think people either are like dreaming sometimes or just not thinking about the amount of work that would be put into like automate those things at scale. But again, like we look at certain bets and certain pieces of software that, we think we can get there with, or where like the software vendor is doing the work to take a lot of the automation burden off our hands and are doing a lot of that work. So let's call out some cool technology that we're working with. Cluso would be a big one that we get a lot of value from. They're automating the production of and like editing and maintenance of video and documentation based on AI workflows. So that's a really cool one. I would also call out, I think I called out Intercom Fin earlier because like AI chatbots, especially now that they're getting more sophisticated and are built on top of so many other customers using and inputting their support data and trends, like they're building a really good base of expertise in that field. So that's one that I'm really excited about. And I would also call out, Courtney, you and I did a CELab podcast a long time ago about localization.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of interesting tooling now that are doing AI-based localization and getting like, well, sometimes varying results, but there's some promising technologies out there. I'm not going to call out any specifically. But then maybe the last one, and Sam, maybe you and I have some stuff to say here because we're now both affiliated with this company, is Parta for like very branded, scalable, collaborative learning content development that's like still interactive and polished and on brand, but it's collaborative. And they're also really thinking about where they play in an AI ecosystem, not just for like the content creation, but also for how they can take the content that's created within Parta and distribute it into AI systems. So I think that's super interesting. Sam, I don't know if you want to add to
I
that.
think that's the part actually that excites me the most about Parta's trajectory is that they're solving a very, very fundamental challenge as we shift from customer education in like a traditional sense to digital and scaled CX. The need to leverage your channels effectively and distribute your content across those channels and measure the performance of the content across those channels becomes a gap. And when you think about the promise of AI, particularly agentic, you can't do that. Like there's just no way to have intelligent agentic systems without having some sort of fundamental knowledge base, all your content centralized,
Yes.
governance and control and all those things, which Parta is leaning into pretty heavily. So again, like solving real deep fundamental problems in our industry. So it's exciting for sure.
100%. So like, let's get back to that, right? Like it's, and Courtney, I actually want to hear what you're excited about in the world of AI too. But like, just to riff off of, because I don't want to forget the original question that you asked me originally. It's garbage in, garbage out. That's the problem, right? Like people think about AI doing the wrong types of things. They think about how can I get AI to do my thinking for me or like write for me or things like that. Yeah. But like if you're not doing that with a solid base of knowledge and solid content, like we've seen it. We've made this mistake. It truly is this garbage in, garbage out problem. And AI is just going to propagate that more because if the core content was inaccurate or didn't have the right perspective, then AI, which is really good at transforming things, is just going to transform crap into a different shade of crap. Like,
exactly correct.
I don't see AI anytime soon replacing that core part of like who is creating the first solid piece of knowledge that is then going to get transformed into something else. It'll get better at the transformation, I think.
Yeah. I read a McKinsey article a couple of days ago about essentially the inefficacy of these chatbots and how it was like 4 out of 5 customers or something have not had a positive experience with the chatbots. No surprise, because all these chatbots are trained on garbage. And these companies don't have a fundamental understanding of like centralized knowledge and like how do you pull together your knowledge in a way that's going to be able to be searched and leveraged and then distributed across those different like modalities where you're serving customers. And Courtney, I know you're obviously leaning pretty heavily and you've created a lot of content recently around how education also now needs to shift and be present within the new sort of search, not search, the opposite of search within these AI engines. So like, what does what does this all mean for the future of our industry? It's like, there's a lot going on to think about.
Tell us, Courtney. Tell us.
I was like, I wish I had the answers. No, the interesting part with like the answer engine optimization, sort of that transition from traditional SEO to now what I think is going to be permanently called AEO. We'll see if anyone comes up with a new fancy name and we'll go from there. But actually, education is really well suited for the LLM answer engine optimization because for decades we've been doing the thing that now Claude and everybody is doing, which is like, let's have a conversation. Let me educate you. Let me kind of take you through an example, a process, et cetera. And so I think customer education teams and, Sam, I know we talk a lot about this, and marketing teams, if you're not at the same table as you're talking about 2026 planning, or if you're in 2026 and you're listening to this and you didn't talk to anybody, you need to, because there's going to be more of a correlation, connection, opportunity to work together than ever before. The best thing we ever did for HubSpot Academy was sit in marketing for a couple of years. While it was a really weird transition, it was really hard. It taught us a lot and it put us at the same table, which now is going to pay off in spades. And, one of the other things that I've been talking a lot about on the AI front is my favorite debate to have is like the constant, well, now that AI can create your content, like you don't need this many people and like blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, whoa. Let's take a step back now. If AI is able to help us do things more efficiently, more effectively, quicker, if those are the goals that you want, the people that we have can probably get to all of the things that we never get to. All of the localization projects we've put off, all of the live training or webinars or community events, or wouldn't it be really nice if we could go on site and train people in this? All of the things that you keep putting as an omission can now start to come on to your plate if you are actually using AI to solve a problem. The argument I got into was like, well, we should just do it with AI because it'll be easier. I'm like, it's not. To train a Hey Gen engine, to actually get it to create a piece of video content where someone doesn't have 7 fingers, or my goodness, if you want it to
You
be
mean you don't?
translated, not on my bingo card for 2025, but we could test it out. There's so much in there, and to me, it's always the people who have little to no learning experience to begin with that are pontificating about how AI can just create all this great content. It's going to be 10 times better. And
They've never done it.
they've never done it. They don't know what it actually means. And very few systems are actually set up to be able to structure data in a way. It's actually very similar to the early days of localization, where you basically had to rebuild your structure so that you could pump it into localization models. Where now, okay, what data format do I need to be able to pump it into these different systems? And we're only talking about the learning space, the content space. We're not even talking about all the other ways that digital customer experience is transformed with agents and all. I mean, that's probably a whole other 2-hour podcast that we could get into.
Yeah. No, but I really appreciate what you're saying here, because it's still a pragmatic view. It's not too dreamy and pie in the sky and oh, but AI is so good now, why can't we just use it to do this and that and the other, right? That's sort of a low information voter way of thinking about AI. The moment you hear too many why can't we just, well, it's well, we can, but we can't just, right? It takes work. In our implementation of Fin, we've spent a lot of time really making sure that our content is accurate and formatted correctly, and we're ingesting the right sources and all of that, because we don't want our customers to experience crap when they open the chatbot. We want it to be a really good experience where we're going to measure ourselves on how effectively they self-serve. But at the same time, sort of we challenged ourselves earlier on now I don't remember what it was, just over indexing on talking about the content that we create and how precious learning content is. I don't think we should be too precious about this either, where we say oh, the content has to be perfect before we can use AI to do anything with it. So I like that kind of balanced, pragmatic approach to saying, hey, what's the outcome that we want to drive, and what investment do we need to make with which tools, including AI, to get there?
And there needs to be, I know we say, the approach, the crawl, walk, run approach. In AI specifically, it's actually super important for you to consider, have a long-term vision for what you want the tool, the purpose of the tool, and the outcomes that you want that tool to drive for you, and build for that. But you can release in small increments. particularly because AI systems get smarter the more you use them and the more data that they have access to. And so starting with a really small use case, being very narrowly focused on solving a very specific problem, and then expanding the scope the more that you use it for that particular thing, while feeding the right data into the system and the right knowledge into the system to then expand its scope into additional use cases, is a really good approach, I think, for companies that are considering adopting new AI tools that are coming onto the market.
Great thing about LLMs, they learn and you can train them.
Exactly. Imagine training. This is why I've always thought it was funny too, because it's like, Court, to your point, like, wait a minute, we're educators. This is what we do. We train customers. We also have to train the models and we have to train the agents. Like, you can't just, it's not a set it and forget it system. It's not like, oh, just plug it in and turn it on and away these agents go and they're smart enough to figure stuff out. Like, you gotta train them the same way that you would anyone else coming into your company. It's the exact
Now
same
you have
thing.
to wonder if like all the thought leaders who are writing about like learning science are now going to start looking at all the white papers being published about how LLMs effectively learn and get
Learn
trained,
different-
right?
yeah,
Because now we
exactly.
can do the learning science of LLMs. And I think someone is probably already in that market and I'm just not following them. So if you know who that is, get in the comments. Let me know.
And get in touch with us. Well, we have been talking for an hour and 15 minutes now. And as much as I'm loving this conversation, we should probably start wrapping it up. I could talk
Yeah.
forever with this group. I feel like we could just have a 2-hour podcast on a regular basis and it would be amazing.
Hey, if Acquired can do it and they can be written up by like HBR about 3-hour podcasts, I think we could do it.
We could do
Mhm,
it.
mhm.
Do our listeners want that? Probably not.
Probably not.
They're sick of me already.
You're everywhere.
Like, Adam,
Come on now.
stop putting on
Next
new
ti-
hats and joining other podcasts.
If I go on the show again, I'm just going to be doing a Joe Rogan impression the entire time.
Amazing. But then you won't get invited onto the show again.
Yeah. Now that you've said that out loud.
Mhm. You know, it's not the first time I've had this exact conversation. Like I just got a huge deja vu.
Was it with me during our Leaders in Learning episode?
You know, it might have been. I might
Stop
have
it.
threatened to do the entire Leaders in Learning video as Joe Rogan.
Sounds
Wearing a
somewhat
hat.
familiar. So
Does
Could be a
someone
thing.
have that recording? Because like I will pay them for it.
you
Hashtag
can,
release the
look,
lost Leaders in Learning episode. Get in the
You
comments.
can reach out. Y'all can reach out and ask for it. I'm
I
not,
will.
not going to be doing that anytime soon. As much as I would love to see that content, because that conversation, I remember being like, damn, that was fun. It was amazing. We had a great chat.
Yeah, we subtweeted a lot of people. It was fun.
We did. It was fun. It was good. It was a good episode. I would love to know, based on everything that we've talked about, what excites you the most about the future of this industry? When you think, and I want us to go like futuristic, and by future, I mean like, let's be real, 6 to 12 months out, everything is going to be different. I feel like everything is accelerating. The pace of change and innovation is tremendously accelerating. So when you think 12 months, 24 months out, what is most exciting to you about the market and some of the technology that's evolving in the market to support these goals that we have? And what does that maybe mean for you in your own career trajectory?
I mean, at risk of repeating myself, like I think the fact that the market is more and more moving towards the things that we are really good at, right? Like creating programs, content, et cetera, that help people learn and help people get better at what they do, but in ways that scale. The tools that we're seeing coming to market, the ways that these programs are starting to align and consolidate, again, not for scope purposes, but genuinely for effective purposes. Like I feel like we're getting a great toolbox, like a toolbox of programs and a toolbox of technologies. And there's still going to be really great people who know how to run these. So I think in that sense, the future is bright. Whether that future looks like, you know, continuing to have a standalone team and function that is called customer education, or whether it eventually all becomes digital, scaled, enablement, like whatever we want to call it. Like, I don't want to get into that debate right now. I'm genuinely excited though about like where that collection of programs is headed. And I think that's still going to be something that smart businesses are going to want to invest in over time. And like when I have these conversations with, you know, kind of like early to growth stage companies, it's still something that they're thinking about. I just think like the tools that we talked about earlier, they're tools that are going to help us do things faster and get to automation quicker and prototype things quicker, right?
Yeah.
It's going to reduce more of the grunt work that we have along the way. And yeah, to that point, what's next for me personally, I think now is where I break the news that probably by the time this episode airs, I will be leaving Personio. By the way, Personio already knows this already, and we've been
This is
Surprise!
where
working
everyone
on the
heard it
transition.
first.
Yeah.
Big news.
Yeah. Surprise. No,
Did
it's
Adam just like leave his job on air?
yeah, this is
This is
how
my
I
notice.
do it. Yeah. Does this count as a notice period? No. Like we have a really good relationship, so this has all been like very well communicated and orchestrated, and everyone knows already. But again, I'm really grateful for the time that I've had at Personio and the programs that I've built, and like I mentioned, both the sponsorship from my own leader, who I'm very thankful to have been able to work for the entire time, but also to my teams that I've mentioned along the way that have built these programs into what they are, and they're carrying the torch now for what that looks like in the future. But for me, that means I'm open. I'm open to possibilities. This is the first time that I have stepped away from a role without immediately having something lined up. And it's something where like I feel like I want to approach with some intentionality about what that means for my energy and my passion, and like what I would be excited to do next, because it's not necessarily just doing the exact same thing again. Like it might be something that looks fundamentally different. So if you are listening to this and you generally liked the things that I had to say and you want to explore something like consulting or whatever, I'm open. I don't know what's next. And so right now, yeah, open to have conversations about interesting things.
What an incredible gift to have this like space and time to think and decompress a little. I mean, like Courtney and I think both have had similar experiences, and it's really important to give yourself the time to allow, at least that's how I felt about things. Obviously, my circumstances were a little different because I didn't make the choice for myself, but giving myself that space to like see what would happen and allow for the opportunities to come to me was the catalyst to me starting my business. Like I didn't really intend on starting a business when I first got the news. It kind of just naturally evolved as a result of some of the conversations that I had. I kept myself very open to possibility. I kind of just like gave myself the time to just have conversations and not have an agenda. I think that's the part. It's like it's really hard though. And Court, maybe you can wrap up and speak to this just a little bit based on your experience, but it's really difficult to fight the natural tendency to just want to jump into the next thing. But giving yourself this space to like let things unfold the way that they're meant to leads you to bigger and better opportunities often.
The FOMO, and I was talking to someone recently about the relevance. And I did a LinkedIn post about it of like, when you leave a company, no matter how long you've been there, when you've had that type of impact and you step away from that ecosystem, there's a human part of our brain is like, oh, am I still relevant in that ecosystem? And if I'm not doing something immediately, do I lose my relevance? And, a lot of the reflection I had leaving HubSpot after a decade was like, am I no longer relevant in an ecosystem that I've curated my personal and professional brand in for so long? And I'll be honest, like I've cried over that because you have to grieve that. You have to like let that go. But the most important thing is you are always going to be relevant to people who are your cheerleaders, your supporters, the people who actually valued you. There are people who will have only valued you for a title that you had, for the logo that you worked for. Those are people we don't want to hang out with anyways. But it's still, that was like a big processing thing for me was, like jokingly, but like even like my headshot was just like so like HubSpotty. And I was like, I got to go take other pictures. I have to step into a new space, a new voice. And I think if I was going through that transition and trying to start at a new company at the same time, it'd have been so easy just to fall into the like, oh, well, I'm now their brand, I'm now their voice, and lose my piece in that. And I've been grateful for the bridge that I've walked across of, okay, this was a chapter of my life. I'm kind of on an island right now. There's a lot of different exit points. I can kayak, I can swim, I can hang out here for a little while. But without that island, I don't think I would be as excited or even as useful to other organizations. I mean, I'm grateful for Sam being able to do like the advisory thing with her and podcasting, all that kind of stuff. Because the three of us, I'm sure, have the same tendency. Like, I can't sit and do nothing. Like, I can't just like chill. Like, what does that look like? What do you mean I can like just go on vacation, like, get my hair done? Like, no. I immediately was like, I have to do something.
Gotta work.
Which I appreciate, but this space is still really important. And, Adam, the sleep is important. The just uninterrupted, non-anxiety waking up to Slack message sleep has been the best thing that has ever happened to me in the last decade. Waking up and the only thing I have is Sam's voice notes is it's a pretty good life. They're unhinged, but they're great.
They are. They are
I don't
sometimes
doubt that.
unhinged. Maybe I'll start voice noting you too, Adam.
Yeah, hey, bring it on, bring it on. I've been baiting you on WhatsApp to leave me more voice notes. So because I'm European now and I use WhatsApp. No, I really appreciate this look into the future and like really makes me feel good about what's ahead. But I think
Amazing.
like fighting that tendency to just jump into something or to say like this seems like a really good opportunity or I'll be missing out or irrelevant if I don't jump into something that resonates with me really hard. And I guess for all of us, like it's a challenge to find that balance between really wanting to like listen to that drive and that hustle and all of that versus giving ourselves the space to really to rest, to get in touch with our energy, to calm down our parasympathetic nervous systems or this is where
Speaking my language.
Yeah,
I
like-
love it.
and really like do things that are in line with our skills and our talents and our energy.
I love it.
So I look forward to that.
I look forward to that for you too. Like, I think watching you both in these, and to a certain extent myself, but having been in these like very kind of high profile gigs and especially being in senior leadership in larger organizations can be not draining, but just like it's something. It's hard. It's like you're in it and it takes up a lot of energy and bandwidth. And so I'm excited for you to be able to have some space and time away from that to just like, come back home to yourself. And then the doors open on so many other opportunities. And I'm very confident that whatever comes next for you is going to be phenomenal. And
Let's
I'll be
see.
eagerly waiting for fresh new content as you have a little bit more space and time in your calendar that might allow for you to step back into some of that too. Maybe
Yeah, sure.
like
Happy to come back and do another 90 minutes.
There you go. I know. Thank you so much for spending this
thank
hour
you.
and a half with us.
Thank you for having me. This was a great discussion, and I always get a lot of energy from talking to both of you. So this has been fantastic, and I really
Love
just
it.
hope that for people listening, it was also helpful.